So we have been on a journey during this season of Lent, and we've been finding various companions to take the journey with us. A couple of weeks ago, our reflection was about the fishermen that Jesus called to be his disciples. And we know their names so well, don't we? James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and Andrew, who brought his brother Simon. You remember what Jesus said when Simon came to him? I'm going to call you Cephas, which means Peter, the rock. And there were also other fishermen, right? Philip and Nathaniel. And then last Sunday, our companions on this Lenten journey were the prodigal son and his older brother and the father. And I must say, the mother behind the scenes, she must have been there too. But don't you sense that so far on the journey, we have had a very masculine perspective so far, which is not uncommon in the Bible because the Bible was written by men and we have very male perspectives in the Bible. And yet then we come to verses like the ones that we've read in Luke chapter 8, that there were many women who also followed Jesus. And when the men ran away at the end, what did it say in the Gospel of Mark? The women stayed until the very end. So the women are also our companions on this Jerusalem road. And this morning I especially want to focus on one of them, Mary Magdalene. So what comes to your mind when you hear the name Mary Magdalene? I'm not going to quiz you and make you speak, but I wonder, it might be different for people who go to church, but I wonder if the person on the street who doesn't typically go to church, when you hear the name Mary Magdalene, I wonder if that person thinks of the Da Vinci Code. You think that's possible? Because the Da Vinci Code actually sold millions and millions of copies of books all over the world. And probably many of us have read it or we've watched the movie. And of course, what is it about? Well, the biblical account doesn't say anything about Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene other than that she was a disciple. And she was the apostle to the apostles because she's there in all of the resurrection stories. And in one of them, she is the first one to witness the risen Lord. So we don't know from the Bible anything more than that. But Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code, he got into the Apocryphal Gospels. I don't know if you've ever heard that word. It's a big, long word. Another way to talk about the Gospels that were part of the early church telling the story of Jesus. There were hundreds of Gospels out there, but only 4 of them made it into the Bible. There were others which were called Apocryphal or Gnostic Gospels. And so this is where Dan Brown got some of his information, that he created this story that Mary Magdalene was not just a follower and apostle of Jesus, but that she was Jesus' wife. They were married and they had a daughter. And after the resurrection, Mary Magdalene and the daughter sailed across the Mediterranean and settled in southern France. And that there is a bloodline that continues to today. Now that's an amazing story. Some novelists really have the gift of imagination. But where does this go back to? One of the Gnostic Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels were found, a whole group of 52 of them, were found in a place called Nag Hammadi, Egypt, which is in the central eastern area of the country of Egypt along the shores of the Nile River. Back in 1945, scholars thought they read about these Gospels being out there, but they didn't actually have access to them until 1945, when they were discovered, this whole group of them. And they were translated from Coptic into many other languages, and one of them was the Gospel of Philip, which tells about this very close relationship that Jesus had with Mary Magdalene. So it's not part of the Bible, it's not part of church tradition, and I used to totally discount it until the Da Vinci Code came out, and my secretary at the time my folks from Community Church will remember Jerry Upson. I love Jerry Upson. She was a wonderful Christian woman as well as a very hardworking secretary who sadly developed a terminal lung condition. And she was like in her last days in this world when the Da Vinci Code came out. And I was very negative about it until I listened to Jerry's perspective one day in the office. And she was so passionate about the idea that, hey, maybe Jesus just was like the rest of us, and he had to struggle with marital problems just like the rest of us do. And he fell in love, and he loved a woman, and she loved him. Jerry she was so passionate about it that ever since that time, I started saying to myself, okay, can I prove it one way or the other? And if it's meaningful to someone else, then why do I need to judge them for something that they find meaningful and that somehow is integrated with the Christian story and is part of that larger perspective of all of these other Gospels and how we continue to make sense of this story today and how it speaks to our lives. So Mary Magdalene, what does she offer us along with the male disciples that we're so much more familiar with? Well, I think this idea that she had 7 demons and that Jesus cast them out, that's something I think that all of us can relate to, even though we don't know exactly what that means. What would it mean to have 7 demons? I don't think anybody, any scholar or scientist can actually define it, but in our own lives, we know what it is, like Mary did, at various times, to be so oppressed by some kind of spiritual or mental or emotional condition that we just can't shake it. What were the 7 demons? Maybe today we would call it depression, clinical depression. Maybe today we would call it struggling with grief and loss in a way that you can't work your way out of it. Or struggling with addiction. Or struggling with shame. Or struggling with mistakes from your past that you can't get over yourself. You tried so hard. Just as Mary must have just struggled with whatever was oppressing her. And there are many interpretations. What does it mean, 7 demons? Well, some scholars say that 7 is the number of completeness, like we have 7 days of the week. And others say, well, maybe what happened is that, which sometimes you read about in the Bible, Jesus had to heal her more than once. So she was struggling with more than one kind of thing, and Jesus kept coming back to her and revealing more of his power and presence so that she was just more and more free in her life. So I think Mary Magdalene shares a very powerful message to all of us about how do we live in our spiritual power? How are we so empowered by God's love in Jesus Christ that we are freed from all of our demons? And we all have them. And the thing about Mary, read her story. Read her story. Think about Mary Magdalene when you're struggling with whatever the problems are that you can't get out of on your own. Mary was healed by the power of Christ in her life. And what I love about this story is that, pastors struggle a lot. Some of you are preachers as well. And the Bible sometimes makes it easy for us by actually laying out all of the truths so that all we have to do is find them and do our best to bring out and illumine them for people. But I think in this case, it's all we know about her is that 7 demons were cast out, and she's completely silent until she's there again with Jesus at the crucifixion. She never leaves. And she's even there with Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus as they take the body down from the cross and lay it in the tomb. And then she's there again with the spices on the first Easter. to embalm the body, but instead she has this encounter with the risen Christ. Where did she get that kind of power to stay through all of that? Well, it came from Jesus, and what I love is that it's not there in the Bible that she ever looked back. He healed her, and she accepted her healing, and she didn't ever return to it. How about for you and for me? How often do we feel that, oh, I've got just this insight that God has given me, or I've sung the words of this hymn and they've really spoken to my heart and it means so much to me, or the Bible has spoken to me, or a friend has spoken to me, and then you go on with your life and then you encounter some other problem and you're back feeling depressed again, you're back feeling anxious again, you're back feeling like I'm overwhelmed again. Look, Mary Magdalene never did that. Jesus healed her, she moved forward, and she never looked back. So she's got power, and out of her power, out of that spiritual power, she lived and dwelled in a sense of peace that she was able to give to others. She was one of the apostles who, as we hear, provided for Jesus all the way from the beginning, where they're accepted as followers, until the cross in Jerusalem. And so she carried herself with such a sense of spiritual power from which peace comes. And that's another very powerful lesson for us, because I know we all are aware of the 5 stages of grief, aren't we? And they're very, very helpful. But I think Mary Magdalene's message to us is, when are you going to be done with the 5 stages of grief? When am I going to say, okay, it's over now, and when that bad memory comes up from the past, or when somebody else who likes to remind me maybe of things in my past, and we all have those people in our lives? When anything like that comes up again, can't we claim the story of Mary Magdalene and say, look, those demons are behind me now. I am moving on, and I'm not going back. And I'm not going to have to rework those stages of grief over and over again. I'm done with that. I'm on my way with Jesus because I've got his power and his peace inside me. Before the service started, I told the congregation that my mother had her homegoing this week. With my friends from community church might not realize. And, you know, she had Alzheimer's for a number of years at the end of her life. And, you know, Alzheimer's is a curse. It's also, in a way, a blessing, in that my mom's desire and her passion for our family, she worked for it her entire life, was to have a close-knit family where we all get along. And I sometimes thought, as I'm there with my sisters, and my mom is in bed, and she can't remember, she finally got it. We're all together. We're not arguing about anything. We're not in any kind of, conflict spin, as most of our families get into at some point. And the amazing thing, too, my mother had a very, very tough marriage. And before she got Alzheimer's, when people would ask her about her marriage, she would say, you know, that was so long ago, I don't even think about it now. And then she got the Alzheimer's, and she certainly wasn't thinking about it now. But the cool thing is that even though she couldn't remember that's great, she couldn't remember the bad memories, and she couldn't communicate with us any longer verbally, we discovered that if we would write out things and put it on a piece of paper, she could read it. And so I'd say, Mom, I'm Evan, your son, and she'd just look at me kind of like with a blank stare. I'd write it out on a piece of paper, and then her face would light up. And so that sense of peace that we had from her getting her dream of bringing this all together, was so powerful. And I think that's what the gift of Mary Magdalene is for us. Look, don't get stuck with your demons. Move on with Jesus. And what do you move on to? Out of that sense of power and out of that sense of peace, you're able to be present with Jesus. You're able to stay with him in his sorrow and in his suffering at the cross. And that's what Mary Magdalene is able to do. I love Mother Mary. And I don't know much. There's not much told about the other Marys and the other women who were there at the cross. But what we do know about Mary Magdalene, think of this. She is so present in her power and in her spiritual peace that she is able to minister to Jesus. She's also able to minister to his grieving mother there at the cross. What a powerful presence that is. I was talking about this with my spiritual director this week, and she reminded me, actually she taught me, I didn't know this, that in sign language, the sign for patience is this. You know that, Vinci, right? Like button your lip, right? Button your lip. Yeah. Thank you. So be quiet. Just be quiet. Be still and know that I am God. That's what Mary Magdalene gives us. And she was present for Jesus all the way to the end, and she was present with him even on Easter Sunday morning. May it be true for all of us as well.